Hello friends and welcome to Knowledge by Nature. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a flip through of Primary Mathematics 2B. If this is something you're interested in, stick around. Alright, welcome back. If this is your first time here, I am a homeschool mom to a second grader. We love all things books, homeschool, and sharing our journey with you. And if that is something you're interested in, I would love if you consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you find this video useful or helpful, I'd love if I get a thumbs up. Alright, so if you saw my last unboxing, I will put that right here. You will know that we purchased the 2B for primary mathematics. For second grade, we finished up our primary 1B, which I can put right here. Then I decided to try out Primary Mathematics 2022. This is the newest edition of Primary Mathematics released from Marshall Cavendish, which is the original publishers of the Singapore math that was brought into the United States. Now, when I did my update last time, I was honestly feeling a lot of uncertainty about this, but it is one of those curriculums that you actually cannot switch very easily from semester A to semester B with this program. Any other of the Singapore maths, including dimensions, you can pretty seamlessly transition from A to B in any level, and it worked pretty well. That is not the case with this one. It is formatted much differently. The contents is much different. So if you start in A, you kind of need to have the mindset of you have to finish with B if you want it to be an easy transition. That's not to say that it can't be done. There's just going to be some holes probably that occur. Which brings me back to my kind of indecisiveness with this program. And to be completely honest, if I could have easily switched from 2A, Primary Mathematics 2022, at the time, I would have switched over to the original US edition of Primary Mathematics. I would have switched back to that over to 2B if I could have easily. But I will say a little bit has changed since kind of finishing up this last chapter and having received this one. I found a resource and I will be sure and add that to the end of the video. So if you're interested in that, please stick around for that. But it has really helped me see this program a little bit differently. This is not to say that I'm for sure going with this for third grade. I don't know that, but I will say that it has made a difference in how I feel about the program now. The first thing I want to show you is we have a 2A Home Instructor's Guide and 2B Home Instructor's Guide. You will see there is a pretty large difference in the thickness of these two semesters here. That's not to say that you're not covering a good amount of material still, but I would say that we're not going into as much depth here. Just a real quick comparison here. For Primary Mathematics 2022, there are a total of 4 chapters. Even though there's only 4 chapters, there is a considerable amount of information that you are covering. For instance, for chapter 22, if you were to follow their schedule, I believe it was 27 days of lessons. And for chapter 3, it was, I think, 24 days of lessons. So just to get an idea, even though it's only 4 chapters, there is a lot of information that you're covering in each of the 4. So this is 2A. Let's jump to 2B, which you see is much smaller. But we still have 5 to 9. So we have 4 chapters in this one. So let's zoom in and look at what we're covering for 2B. For 2B, we start with chapter 5, which is where we are covering length. We're going to measure and estimate length in metric units, measure and estimate length in customary units, compare and order length, word problems, and then we have all of the chapter wrap-up with the STEM project, the chapter practice, the chapter test, all of those extra things, including the heuristics at the end of the chapter. Then let's go to chapter 6. Chapter 6, we are starting multiplication, which I am really, really glad to get into. I wish this would have been introduced a little bit sooner, but I'm sure there's a reason for that. We have multiplication, add equal groups, even and odd numbers, skip count by 2, 5, 10s, multiplication, and then again, all of our chapter wrap-up, performance task, STEM project, chapter practice, chapter test if you choose to get that extra book, chapter self-reflection, and then my journal. So a few of these would kind of be lumped into one day, but most of these are going to be multiple days, and we'll look at that again to see exactly how many days are in each chapter. Then we have our solve heuristics for chapter 6. Chapter 7, we're going into time, tell time, hours and minutes, and then again the whole chapter wrap-up section here. Moving over to chapter 8, we're going to be looking at data, then picture graphs, bar graphs, line plot, our chapter wrap-up. There is no heuristics with chapter 8. Chapter 9, we're looking at shapes, 2D and 3D shapes, partition, 2D shapes, and then our chapter wrap-up with our solve heuristics for chapter 9. Now let's step back and take a look to see what they are averaging each chapter in days. If you have never seen the inside of this teacher book before, I will do a quick overview here. So at chapter 5, you get the chapter overview, which is telling the teacher a little bit of what to expect from this chapter, the things that you might need, and the things that you might want to really, key ideas that you might want to bring forward. Here's the section of the materials that you'll need. If you look at the chapter at a glance here, we can see right here that they are expecting 18 days for this chapter. Then we see each day that they are recommending what day you cover the lesson. So we have 18 days for chapter 5. Quick view at the very first chapter opener here. We have our chapter opener, the recall, which is where you're practicing some of the things that we've maybe already discussed, teaching tips, additional support, more teaching tips. We have making it a game, digging deeper, another teaching tip, and then we have our recall answers. This would be considered your very first full chapter lesson here. The chapter opener is just your introduction of the whole chapter, where this is your actual first lesson introducing something. So we have our lesson opener, our learn, our focus question, which is what you kind of look at the beginning and then evaluate throughout the lesson. We have an activity. The learn together section is where you are learning together. Like it says, you are working with your student to go over this material. And then we have a quick lesson debrief. We have our answers over to the side, more teaching tips with a digging deeper. And then we finish up with the reflect and connect, practice on your own, which is where you're going to give them the student book and they are going to do this on their own. They're going to do their best to not have any help at this point. More resources if you need them, a do more at home, the answers to the practice on your own, and then additional support. This is the same setup throughout the entire time, so let's jump to chapter 6. Just real quickly, I do want to show you that 5D is ending with a few lessons on word problems. So it does look like we have a few lessons covering just word problems. In case you're curious, again, I kind of want to show you a complete flip through in case you have not seen this before. A chapter reflection is at the end of each chapter, and this is where the student reflects themselves. Can they use a meter stick to measure the length? And they kind of evaluate themselves. And this is one of the new things about this program where they are having the student really think and self-reflect about the math so that they get a better understanding of how they may or may not have a concept down. Then we have a journal section if you choose to do that. And then this is the heuristics problem, which I will show you in the actual student book. Now we're jumping to chapter 6 where we are going into multiplication. Again, we have our chapter overview here of multiplication where it's kind of what are we talking about? How are we going to introduce this? Here's the key ideas and the materials that you'll need. For this chapter, it looks that we are looking for 14 days of lessons. This gives you an idea of how many days that they're expecting this lesson to take. Depending on your student, it could take more, it could take less, but this is kind of an overview, a quick idea of what that might entail. Let's jump to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is time. We are looking at 10 days of lessons for chapter 7. Then let's jump to chapter 8. All right, for chapter 8, we are looking at data and we are looking at 11 days of lessons. Then let's go to our final chapter here, chapter 9. For chapter 9, we're looking at a total of 14 days of lessons where we have our chapter opener and our recall. Then we jump into the actual first lesson where we are dealing with shapes. We go down here and it's actually on the next page, which you can see here, which we end up with our chapter wrap up, our STEM project, our chapter practice. If you're not doing a test or an assessment, then you can see that you could skip this section here, so it would shorten your days. But that is the end of 2B for Primary Mathematics 2022. Now that we've looked through all of this, that shows that if we follow their schedule, you've got 67 days of lessons in 2B. Now, as a comparison, there were 85 days of lessons in 2A. So you can see that that makes sense because there is a large difference. That also honestly makes me feel really good because I was worried that this took quite a bit longer and I wasn't going to be able to finish for the year, but I am. So that makes me really happy that I'm going to be able to complete this curriculum for the second grade year and be able to move on to 3. So that is awesome. I'm really excited to know that now on just a personal note. But yes, we have 85 days of lessons in here. We have 67 days of lessons in here. Now you will see that I only chose to get the home instructor's guide and the student book this time. For 2A, I purchased the home instructor's guide, the student book, and the Mastery and Beyond, I believe is what it was called. We just did not use that. I will put a link here again so that you can see what 2A looked like, what all was inside it, so that if you really want to look at these programs, you can look at them in pretty good detail. We didn't use the Mastery and Beyond hardly ever, so I did not make the additional purchase. Now let's look into the student book. One of my favorite things about Primary Math 2022 is that they have included both the textbook and the workbook as one. Now, this could be a negative depending on your family situation. If you want to be able to reuse that, you're going to have to get a little bit more creative. It does not have the resale value if you're writing in it. So again, that's a negative. For me, I love that it's all in one book, and I love the amount of work that is in this. That is by far one of my favorite things, is that they do not add in an insane amount of work. If you need more workbook pages, that's where you can get your Mastery and Beyond. I think there's an additional practice or your test if you want to add that all in. But if you're just looking for a program that gets straight to the point, let's look at a few questions, let's do a few questions, you do a few questions, boom, you're done. So I do appreciate that. Let's look inside the student book. All right, so here we go for 2B. It is colorful, which is really nice. If you've never seen inside this before, it gives kind of a walkthrough of how this works. We have our chapter opener, we have a task, we're gonna learn, we have an activity, learn together, and then practice on their own. There's the cute little animals inside, which she absolutely loves. And this is another feature of the book where we are having a recall, where it helps you think back on what you've learned. We have a chapter practice, has questions for you to practice what you have learned. A performance task, solve heuristics. This guides you to use different strategies to solve problems. There's little math talks in here, and I'll show you some of those. A think section, which makes you come up with new ways to solve the problem, and then the STEAM project. So these, to be completely honest, I was a little let down by these. I didn't think that they were like anything fantastic, which is really what based my decision on trying this in the first place, is I thought this would be awesome to have incorporated in it. We do enough of these sort of STEM projects at home, in different formats that really this wasn't necessary for me. But if you don't use it, if you don't really incorporate much of this, it's an awesome way to add a few things in here. So we have our content of it's showing chapter 5, this is what they're going to learn. Chapter 6, this is what they're going to learn. Chapter 7, chapter 8, we have chapter 8, chapter 9, and then the glossary and the index. Again, you can see it's very colorful. I love the simplicity of the first page. It's not overly crowded. It just, right here, how would you compare the length? So this one is just, we're looking at it and we're going to compare the length. Here's our chapter opener. So this is really just, we're introducing what we're going to be talking about. We're going to do a little recall section here where we kind of think about some things that maybe we've already talked about previously. So you can see day 1 of this is very, very short. Again, they're going to assess, can they compare the length of 2 objects? Order 3 objects by length, estimate and measure length and non-standards. Some of these chapters, the chapter opener and the first lesson can really be done in the same day. So if you would like to kind of condense your chapters even more, a lot of times these 2 can be done on the same day without it being overwhelming. Now there are other times where we only do the chapter opener and then we do this the next day. Here is our very first lesson for chapter 5. Most of the time it recommends that you cover this section up right here. So this learn section, I have a piece of paper that perfectly covers this section, and I keep that in her book because they want the student to look at this section first without seeing any of the information on the bottom. So they look at the question and they kind of try to answer the question without really going into any of the lesson. Then after we've observed this and spoke about it a little bit, we're going to go on to the learn, and we're going to learn together. So we see that we have our cute little creature over here that's giving us hints about the meter. M is a unit of length. And this is the little math talk that we saw when we looked right here, where it talks about sharing your thinking skills with maybe your classmates. And so this just kind of has another prompt for them to think about math. Let's go to the next page. We have our little activity. This one, we're going to use tools to measure the length of an object in your classroom, and then we're going to fill in the blanks. Here, we're still working together. The teacher and the student are working together to learn the length of this car would be about how many in meters, the height of the car, and then we come over to lesson. Then we come over to question 2, where we're going to estimate and measure the width of your classroom to the nearest meter. Again, we have another cute little animal here, all very colorful, not really obnoxious with the images, I don't think. And then here is practice on your own. There are 2 practice points. For us, this is enough. Now, usually there are more than 2. We'll jump over to multiplication in a minute so you can see. I think for things like time and length, we may not get as much practice on your own, but honestly, they're practicing here. They're practicing here. If they can do this alone, they probably have it. If not, you have the option of getting Mastery and Beyond, where some of the questions are going to be a little bit more difficult and there is going to be more practice. Now let's run over, and so now we have our chapter 2, and we're just going to keep flipping through here until I get to the next chapter, which should be multiplication. I believe chapter 6 is multiplication, but you can see nice and colorful, not looking at a whole lot of practice on your own. Here is another practice on your own where you can see the amount of work that they're going to have. And then here you can see that we are probably starting to work into those word problems and incorporating what we know with word problems. Actually, here is where the word problems is starting. So you can see you would cover this up. You would talk about the word problem, and then you can see how we would use the bar model to do that. Word problems, word problems. So the word problems are incorporated into the curriculum quite a bit. Here is the performance task where they are going to pretty much take everything that they've learned and apply it. Then they are going to do their own little assessment here of how accurate was their work. Were they able to do these things clearly? And then if you want to add any teacher's words there. Here is a STEM project if you want to have an idea of what one of the STEM projects might be. And then to wrap up chapter 5, we have our chapter practice, which is where they take all of the information that they have covered throughout these days of lessons, and this would be independent work. They would just really be working on this to see, did they actually get it? While there may be limited amount of practice with each lesson, there is this whole chapter practice that gives them quite a bit of practice to make sure that they got it. If any of these they didn't get, then you can go back and you can see where we might need to practice a little bit more. Real quickly, you'll see that there are some green bars on some of these questions. When you get to the end, this persevere is not joking. Most of the time, this is a really, really difficult question that's going to have you working at it a lot. There have been times where we actually just paused and picked up the persevere on the next day because it really is something they're going to have to work quite a bit on most of the time. I did finally really appreciate the level of difficulty that we got at the end of these chapters when we were working with questions like this. The next thing for chapter 5 is you have the heuristics, which is a lot of times like you're working backwards or you're just working in different steps. It's a really neat way to kind of bring about everything that you've been working on. All right, let's move into chapter 6, multiplication. So we have our chapter introduction where we're looking at how would you find the number of sandwiches in all. The little girl is saying there are 3 equal groups of sandwiches. How many sandwiches are there? Take in the picture, talk about the picture, and try to answer the question. Then we come over here to recall, where we're kind of practicing some of the things that we've already done. Again, recall is we're just recalling some information that we've already talked about before moving in to the actual lesson. So you can see that here we are adding equal groups. You're going to cover this so that they're only looking at this picture right here. How many ladybugs are there in all? What are the ways you can use? What are the ways you can use to find the answer? So you're going to look at this, talk about it before you go down here and you see it already split up. So you can see that here they're showing that you would break it out into 2s. If you covered this up originally, they're going to have to think about it. They're not going to know automatically. We're going to come over here and we're going to learn together where we're looking at glasses of juice. They're telling us 2 groups of 3, 4 3s. Going through all of the practice here. So you can see there's a little bit more learning together when we get into a little bit more complicated section as far as like this is how it would look for addition and subtraction lessons, whereas you could see with the measurement it was a little bit smaller scale of practice. Here we are still practicing together. Then we have our practice on our own, where this is where the student kind of takes off by themselves. We've learned about it, we've talked about it together, and now they're going to take those concepts and they're going to try to answer the questions themselves. Even though it says that there's only 2 questions, there is in fact different steps that they're going to be taking to make sure that each question is correct. This is our multiplication. So I will just flip through this really quickly. That way you can kind of get an idea of what this would look like. Here at the end, we have our how did we do? We're coming into our STEM project with this one. We're growing plants. And then we have our chapter practice where we're going to take everything that we've learned in chapter 6 and they are going to apply it independently. They are going to do this on their own. Then we have our solve heuristics and then we go into time. So again, this is just going through the same thing again. We come over to our next chapter here where we are looking at data. Again, I love the images. I really do like how clean these images are. And then we are finishing up with chapter 9. For chapter 8, we have another STEM project. We have our chapter practice, which actually ends up being quite a bit of practice for this data section. And then we move on to shapes. So it is quite likely that this is going to take multiple days to do the chapter practice. Let me see what it suggests. So yes, I looked back at the student book. I looked back here at the teacher book, and we can see for chapter 8 that they are recommending 2 days of lessons for this chapter practice. Doesn't mean that you have to do it that way, but if this is a lot, then just split it up into 2 days. That way they can really get a good wrap around what they have learned, and anything that you see that they're having issues with, you might want to pause, go back and talk about. If we're having problems with tally marks, then okay, we got this question wrong. Maybe let's go back and review that just a little bit more before we go on to the next chapter of shapes. And this is our last chapter for chapter 9. It is set up just like the rest of them, where you have your look at it, learn, then learn together section, and then our practice on your own. Occasionally you will have a little think section here with a practice on your own, and this is where I have no edges or verticals. I have a curved surface. What shape am I? So they have to kind of think outside of the box to get these answers. Then I'm just going to go ahead and finish flipping through here. We have a performance task where we are doing different questions to be able to complete that. And the very last chapter practice is here. And then we end with a heuristics and then the glossary. So this is the end of 2B in primary mathematics. One thing I did forget to show you, in the very, very back of the Home Instructor's Guide, we have teacher resources, and this is where it is showing you what the form would look like if you needed to pull up one of the resources. You can download this from your online teacher resources, which you get when you purchase the Home Instructor's Guide. This gives you an idea of what the page is going to be looking like that you're going to be pulling up. So depending on what it is, it could be that you don't necessarily need to print it. Maybe you could do this on your own, or maybe you already have a manipulative that would work for those sort of scenarios. I want to quickly show you a resource that I found on YouTube where it is one of the authors of this book discussing different steps. So let's quickly look at that. All right, this is the resource that I wanted to show you today. I just recently found this. I don't know how I didn't find it before, but this is Jessica Kaminsky, and she is on YouTube, and she is one of the authors of the new Primary Mathematics 2022. She has a playlist here that I just find really, really helpful if you have never used this. Part one is preparing for your chapter. Part 2, readiness for the chapter. Part 3, opening the lesson. Part 4, zero in on the objective. Part 5, extend with variation. Part 6, assess with independent practice. 7, wrapping up the chapter. Part 8, the STEAM project. Part 9, chapter mastery, and Part 10, the heuristics. She goes into detail about why these are included in the program, how best to use them. So if you are new to this program, I highly recommend coming and checking her out. I found it extremely helpful, and if you are thinking about this program, it really helps you get a great grasp on how you might be using this. I wanted to make sure that I showed this to you because I had not stumbled onto this before, and it has been something that's been really insightful for me and just helping me understand why we do some of the things that we do, and to help me make sure that I'm pointing out some of the things in the curriculum that I might not have been doing as great a job on. All right, friends, I hope that you found this helpful or informative. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions regarding primary mathematics, please reach out to me down in the comments below. Again, look down in the description and I will add in our additional primary mathematics videos that we may have, because Singapore math is what we have been with since kindergarten. So this is something that I am somewhat familiar with. So I hope you have a wonderful day. I appreciate you taking your time with me today, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.